and community parks that protect important natural areas, bring the region together, and foster health and well-being for everyone. The word resilient is sort of the current language that's used. It used to be sustainability, but really resiliency captures more of the climate change approach that many communities are taking to adapt and to be proactive where possible, to be ready for changes due to climate change. Connections is so important. Trails, for example, are one of those things that come up at the top of the list in the regional district of Nanaimo, as well as most communities that we're working in right now. Trails are a huge priority for a lot of communities, and that can link to also connecting natural areas. Bringing the region together, that stems from the accessibility, creating those connections, but also providing opportunities for recreation, opportunities to celebrate the community, and then fostering health and well-being for everyone links into just the importance of parks, especially as we've seen in the past year, the importance of parks for people's everyday access to nature, ability to stay healthy and to socialize outside, mental health as well as physical health. I'll leave it open here if there are any questions or tweaks, or if there's questions on the wording or suggestions for other keywords that should be incorporated here. This will go back out to the public in the second round of engagement for their comments as well. We'd like to make sure it's good enough to do that next step.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, through you, Chair. I like the draft vision. There's some language that I think is important to consider, and it's tied into a few comments I'll have on the goals, but seeing the increasing importance of parkland, also from the climate lens, and also related to a variety of environmental metrics around biodiversity, and as a natural asset in terms of watershed health. Some language around natural assets if it appropriately catches sort of the larger application, because I think that there's potential to have a bit more integration with efforts being made sort of in the drinking water and watershed protection planning, also with our development of key drainage and infrastructure and things of the like that that's taken into account. And I'm not sure exactly how to articulate that, but the natural asset seems to be sort of a concept that could capture some of that. And I'm seeing the beginning of that as important natural areas, but maybe we can flesh that out. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to wordsmith things in there like that.
This is the time, though, and I think that's these nuances are important. So we are taking notes, and we'll try to we'll come up with some options.
Okay, sure. Erin, did I see your hand there?
Yeah, Jan was ahead of me. I'm happy to go after him.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to flip through this to everybody. Go ahead, Jan.
Through the chair, yeah, it would just really quick. I was just wondering if just replacing the word areas with assets would make sense here. Yeah.
Would that address your comment?
Potentially, I think my preference would be to just provide some suggestions on some points, and then allow wordsmithing after the fact and after we've had a bit more discussion on other points, just so that we can get a bit more of a holistic sense of where things are going. But I think, Jan, that could be a potential solution. And I just want to avoid making any decisions right off the mark to unnecessarily narrow a perspective based on a limited comment. So thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Erin. We'll jump in there.
Thanks, Stuart. So just kind of high level, I feel like the statement could be worded in a different way that isn't passive. So, sorry, I'm being really inarticulate. So the regional district of Nanaimo has a resilient connected system. I feel like we could probably be a little stronger in our language. The regional district of Nanaimo park system is resilient, connected, like something with a bit more oomph. So that's just a kind of a tense piece. And then Megan, I'm glad that you noted, you kind of went through and took us from how the draft, the language and the engagement is now reflected in the vision, because the concept of bring the region together, I found a bit kind of watery. But then when you talked about how people look at parks as an opportunity to connect and for people to experience community, it made more sense to me. So I'm wondering if we could kind of go a little bit more granular in that, than something, again, just stronger language than bring the region together. And wordsmithing in a Zoom meeting is about as bad as it gets. And Megan, I don't want to dishonor your work, but maybe I'm wondering if we just give you ideas.
This is fine. Yeah, we won't get to a final vision statement, I think, today. But I definitely appreciate the comments, and especially on the tense. And if bringing the region together is a bit too vague, it could be more about connecting communities and the social aspects of parks.
Yeah, if that's what the engagement data showed, I think that would be well reflected. But I think something with just a little bit more kind of slightly more aggressive edge, or this is our park system is awesome. We should be saying that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Erin. Is anybody else have anything to add on that? Oh, Vanessa, go ahead. Sorry, it's hard to see everyone.
No, that's fine. I'm not actually really here, so call on all the committee members before I speak. So I'm coming at this with fresh eyes, and I guess I'm following up kind of Ben's reflection that, I know when I look at the feedback that you got a lot about connection, conservation, preservation. I don't see that reflected in the vision in terms of, it's health and well-being. It's very people focused, whereas and I haven't seen the data that you got, but it looks like there is a lot of interest in that conservation, or, providing habitat for plants and animals, kind of biodiversity component that I don't see really reflected in the vision. And, it's very utilitarian in a way, which would be part of, if you included the word asset, I actually would find that a bit problematic, just because it is a transactional kind of thing, which is a way that you can track things, but maybe I don't know if that's in a vision. And then the other thing, and I liked Erin's comment about being active, but should the vision be broader, because it talks about regional community parks, but there's all the municipal parks of our member municipalities. There's protected areas through the natural the nature trust, there's provincial parks, there's, it's a network of protected areas across the region, and that our parks are an important component of that. But, they're not isolated, and do we want them to be considered in isolation? And I would argue we don't. So those are just some of my observations. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Any other ideas, points people want to raise? Okay, not seeing any.
So I think what I've heard, I know Ivy's taking detailed notes from your comments, but what I've heard is a more active voice, more integration of the other benefits of parks, like the natural assets, the watershed benefits, connecting to other, the broader picture. Maybe better wording around how parks bring the community together, and making sure that the ecological aspects, the biodiversity aspects really stand out. Part of that might be that it's sort of in the middle of the paragraph, or maybe too long-winded of a way of saying some of these things. So we will work on refining the wordsmithing here. Did I miss?
Vanessa?
And my apologies for talking so much, but I'm just clarifying, when you were getting the feedback, I'm curious, and it talks about conservation, preservation, and then recreation. Were you getting the feeling from feedback that they were talking about conservation areas in the terms of, set aside, people don't get to access it? Or do you think that they were thinking that would be a primary component, but there would still be trail access and stuff like that through there? Because I'm curious of if there is an interest from the public that you heard that for areas just to be set aside specifically for conservation purposes, or they kind of want those dual aspects.
My sense that there is concern in the community about development. So just keeping some areas free of, residential or commercial development was part of this. And then my sense was that I didn't hear anybody, I would be surprised if there was anybody who said, oh, we need access to all of the natural areas that we have in the park system. Most people who were in favor of protecting the ecosystems and the natural areas, I think, valued those things intrinsically, not just for the recreation aspects. Definitely heard that as a value, just those areas being there and being protected.
Great, thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it was just a comment to the Director Craig. I've been working in the industry for quite some time now, and there is still quite of ambiguity and misunderstanding about the difference between conservation and protection. One, protection being really seeing the value of a natural asset having a value of itself, in and of itself, without human interaction, and conservation being more geared towards building a sustainable relationship with nature where we access it, right? So I think I did, when I was in these engagement, I did see that people were kind of mixing both, and I didn't really hear the whole we would want to have protection area where people are not invited to recreate in it, and then using that word protection kind of more in a conservation sense. I don't know if that helps or not. That's what my take was during the engagement. So I guess it just if we go for semantics and we say protect important natural areas, then I think that it implies that that it's less of a conservation but more of a protection.
Thanks, Jan. If there's nothing else on this, I guess we'll move past it and see how the wordsmithing turns out. I guess back to you, mate. Yeah.
Thanks. As we went through the process of developing the draft, we pulled out what we had heard, the issues that we had come upon, analysis, things that we got pointed towards through the analysis of the parkland, and sort of just made a long list of potential recommendations, and then started to sort them. And that's how we ended up with these 6 goals. Is, we had a long list of recommendations and then started to group them. Some things overlap, so some recommendations could be in one or more category, and you'll see there's lots of linkages. And in the draft plan, we tried to, at the end of each recommendation, if there was a linkage to another recommendation, we tried to highlight that so that we could ensure that those connections were clear. We also tried to highlight where the goals and the recommendations linked to the regional growth strategy, electoral area OCPs, and previous regional parks and trails planning goals. So that was those were some of the things that we were thinking about when we were developing these 6 goals with the recommendations underneath. So we started from the bottom and then came back up to these 6 goals. Number 1, I think, does reflect the sentiments we heard from the community that protecting natural and cultural areas is a high priority, and that's why it's actually goal 1. These aren't necessarily in direct 1 to 6 order, but that one seemed an obvious one to be goal number 1. Contributing, supporting making parks and trails a key contributor to health and well-being of residents came in at number 2. That's sort of reflecting the fact that these parks and natural areas also provide recreation opportunities, and that's an important piece, secondary piece of the park system. Improving equity and access to parks and trails sort of encompasses the goals around making sure that everybody has access, that there's coordination between different jurisdictions. And then also goal number 4, engaging residents, supporting partners and volunteers. This, as you develop the parks and trails system, it's just really important to leverage all the resources you have. There's great resources within the regional district, as well as with all the member municipalities and organizations in the area. So there's a lot of volunteer potential, particularly around trails. So that's an important piece. We did have a separate goal just really to focus in on climate change and the importance of incorporating that lens through all the parks and trails planning, design, and operations and maintenance, making sure the parks are playing an important role in supporting the regional district in sustainability and the ability to adapt to climate change. And finally, there are the 6th goal, maintaining the sustainability of the park service, staff, and resources. There's a lot of recommendations in here, and in order to make that happen, we wanted to highlight some of the things that would help to make this a reality. And accounting for the resources required to do so is an important piece. I think from here, I'm just going to dive into each goal and the recommendations in a bit more detail. We still have plenty of time, but please feel free to jump in with questions or comments as we go. Try to leave some space. Director.
Okay.
Yeah, just a comment on the general goals, you know, and tying this into sort of maintaining proper resourcing. Just have been thinking a lot just about general strategy development and strategic goals and that, and really trying to build in an outcome lens to the goals that allows that your progress towards the goals is measurable and trackable, so that you can say, like, well, we're not meeting these goals. Why not? You know, is it because we're not resourcing them properly or not? And I think it's worthwhile that we put that lens on when we're reviewing these goals to see, is there ability to sort of like track, are we meeting these goals or not meeting these goals? Are they written in a way that allows for that type of assessment? Because I do believe that there is value in that, and not all goals that you can do that with, but you know, where are we in terms of acquiring enough parkland to meet the needs, or ecological needs, or recreational needs of the community, and that. So yeah, just a comment. Thank you.
Yep, definitely. Thank you. I think metrics are will be part of the next step. So we've done recommendations, but refining those and making them measurable and trackable wherever we can is definitely a good goal to have. So goal number 1, protecting important natural and cultural areas through leadership in planning, acquisition, and partnerships. The first action is drafting a biodiversity strategy, and these are just to note, these actions are summarized, so they're a bit shorter versions than what's described in the plan. So there's a considerable amount of detail, more detail in the plan for your consideration, but essentially a biodiversity strategy is very useful. You can work with member municipalities, conservation organizations, First Nations to create that regional vision for what a network of parks and protected areas for owned and operated by different jurisdictions, the different organizations, how that might look in the very long term, including what those key habitat hubs are, where the smaller nodes are, and how they might all connect. It's just so important for the long-term sustainability of the region and helps protect the ecosystem services that you have, the natural assets such as the forests, rivers, and wetlands. Only 3% of the land base in the RDN is protected, and with land values rising, and frankly, the acquisition budgets are not going to keep up with that those rising land costs. So collaborating is how you can. It is just going to be so much more powerful. That collective vision can facilitate funding, access to funding and resources, partnering with not-for-profit organizations and societies also can support you in terms of funding and just capacity for management as well. And just the results will be better. So this isn't suggesting that the RDN does a biodiversity strategy all on its own in a bubble, but actually helping to coordinate a regional approach to biodiversity conservation. There are a couple examples out there that I think would be good to look at as you pursue this. And one is the regional district of the Okanagan-Similkameen. The RDOS has a really good biodiversity strategy that's worth looking at. The CRD did one as well. It's quite high level in how they summarize that vision, but it's quite powerful in that way. Number 1.2, or recommendation 1.2, the acquisition process. This is actually going on as we speak. Jan and I know is working on updating the criteria for acquisition, and there's a whole process going on separately. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. We will have to update this recommendation in the plan. But also ultimately, the acquisition process should reflect the context of climate change. It should reflect the biodiversity strategy when that is done. There are things such as First Nations reconciliation and values that could be incorporated. And then always keeping up to date in terms of the rare and threatened ecosystems and development patterns. I think I'll stop there. Jan, did you want to jump in at all in terms of the acquisition piece?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that that acquisition process piece we've reserved for a future date, and I think the next couple of weeks, or I'm not sure if the date has been set or not, but we're gonna it's gonna be an opportunity for us to look at the revised form that was formulated based on the input that I received from the directors. And go from there. And there'll be also some a portion of that meeting will be discussing or sharing our finances and our financial plan and what's in it for what. And so we have something tangible to talk about, real things, and go from there. It may it brings some perspective about the regional district's ambitions versus the what's in the plan. So I felt that it wasn't really a good timing today to have that here. So it'll be at a later date, and it'll be my suggestion is that the meeting is solely focused on that, and that was my my take, and that's what the direction that we've took here. So that's it for the acquisition process. I'm not sure if you, Megan, what else you want me to add here, or?
No, that's exactly what I wanted you to mention, that there's a separate process, and that you'll have another chance to look at the acquisition process.
Just curious, Jan, does that come to this committee or the Regional Parks and Trails?
Yeah, thank you, reclaiming. Yeah, it's to this subcommittee. I just there's a lot to talk about, and yeah, and I felt that it would be good to have just a meeting solely on that, and the form, the revised form, as well as some of the information that I've touched on, which will be sent in advance to the directors so they have a chance to review it and make some comments or ask some questions, clarifications. So when we're at the meeting, yeah, we can go and dive a bit deeper.
Sure, thank you.
Back to the recommendations here.
Nope. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Sorry. Was there another question?
I think Vanessa had one. It's hard with.
Sorry, I didn't hear you call me. So this is interesting for me because I see in the goal that you talk about cultural areas, but I did not see that reflected in the list of information that you got or the vision. And so it's interesting to me. I mean, I'm not objecting to it, obviously, but it seems to not flow or be reflected in the vision. I'm wondering if that is something that might be useful to incorporate.
In the vision, bringing it back to the vision.
Well, yeah, I just didn't see it in the first slide that you gave with the list of priorities that had been identified with conservation and recreation and everything like that. Cultural areas wasn't identified. It wasn't reflected in the vision, but yet it's identified as one of the top goals. And so I'm just wondering if it might be useful to reflect it elsewhere. It might not. You might have discussed it elsewhere. And then I'm wondering for the biodiversity strategy, would that flow into kind of like an acquisition strategy as a component of it? If you're kind of identifying areas across the region, would that be a component of it, do you think?
It definitely could. I know you have a process already, so how that flows, ideally it would flow into the acquisition process in some way, whether that's another, like a specific acquisition strategy, or otherwise incorporated into the checklist of the evaluation process that goes on. But yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. In the plan, the acquisition process, some of the things we highlight that should be considered are priorities and goals of local First Nations, the outcomes of the biodiversity strategy, climate change considerations like sea level rise, floodplains, aquifers, and other natural assets, and the impacts to those, links to other plans as well. In terms of the cultural assets, unfortunately, we haven't had any engagement with First Nations through this process yet, but that is underway. So that will hopefully feed in and give us a bit more certainty around what should be mentioned and how that should be incorporated here. But it is highlighted in the acquisition processes that could be a consideration in terms of what the goals of local First Nations are as well. Let's see, the updated regional parks classification system. This might speak to some of what you were mentioning, Director Gesselbracht, with the natural assets, but one thing we saw was just needs to be clarity that just because you acquire a parcel for a regional park doesn't mean it's going to be developed right away, and doesn't mean that there can necessarily be access to all parts. So one of the updates to the classification system is just to include a regional park reserve designation. So then that gives you the leeway to move forward with acquisition without necessarily also having to develop considerable amount of trails that you may not have the resources yet to develop and maintain. So, looking forward, I could see maybe there are other designations that come up and that are linked to aquifer or watershed considerations. That's a possibility as well. In terms of number 1.4, so this kind of classification is sort of within an individual regional park, and that speaks to that balance of protection and access. So presumably, if you are going out and acquiring high value natural areas, important biodiversity areas that are sensitive to climate change or important for natural assets for your sustainability, you want to carefully manage where recreation happens, where trails go, what parts of those parks are appropriate for parking lots and washrooms, for example, or picnic areas where you actually do want some cleared areas. So making sure that each park is zoned appropriately. So you have a recreation zone where you might focus in on that's just lower sensitivity, where you could have a parking lot and access. This is already a tool used within the regional parks system. So continuing that and really emphasizing the purpose of those zones and sticking to them when you do park planning is important.
Again, can I just chime in here and just
Sure.
Some of the challenges I think it's good for the community to hear of the word zone and open to any input now or in the future, because there's obviously a zone or a zoning of land. So there is park zoning designation, of which we don't have and don't utilize in the RDN as of yet. And it's always been on the to-do list that keeps getting bumped down the line. Where we do have park zones is actually on Gabriel Island through the Islands Trust process. And then we do park designation, which is different. So when we create a regional park, we actually come back and update the bylaw and designate it. So I think it's good to be aware of the challenge of the word zone, because then you have like a conservation zone within a park, and then you have the park zone. So this is kind of a trip up statement that the community or politicians might bump into as well too. So wouldn't mind throwing that wicked problem out to the group, sort of like, here's a word that we've been using. We understand it as staff that, you have a park have different development zones and the conservation zone and carrying on. But the broader community may interpret that means it's going to be zoned in the bylaw sense and so forth. So even put that out to Megan and your team as well too. Is there any other wording that could help through that communication aspect of this? Thank you.
Yeah, I see where the confusion could be, and I did notice in some of the electoral area OCPs the recommendation to create a park zone, or to zone certain parcels as park, I guess is the way you say it. But offhand, I'm not thinking of any alternative, but
yeah, I think it's just good to be aware of the issue, because I could kind of see this coming up.
Park use areas,
quadrants.
Use areas might quadrants, or I guess quadrants is a
quads. So anyway, yeah.
Could I just jump in, Stuart, with a question?
Yeah, so, just anybody jump in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I totally didn't understand what it meant to continue to use a regional park site level zoning system. But Megan, hearing you discuss it, what it means is that when we're designing parks, we're keeping people in certain areas of the park to protect other areas of the park. So I agree with Tom, we could probably find better language that wouldn't be, the term in zoning can be, I agree, could be a bit inflammatory when we're talking about parks. It makes sense, but I don't think we want our goals to be things that we have to deeply explain. So, I mean, something as simple, actually, I'm not even going to hazard I'm not going to take a stab at it, but if I just want to confirm that my read of this sentence is accurate, that we want to keep people in certain areas of the parks. Some parts are rec parks, some parts are, we want to keep people out. Could I ask for a clarification of update the regional park classification system? How do we currently classify our regional parks differently? Like, if I could just have some clarity on that. I'm not sure what our current classification system is, so I'm not sure how and what we would be aiming for with an update.
Just that there isn't currently a park reserve classification. So all parks are either regional parks or conservation areas, I believe, Jan.
And a reserve is a different type of park?
A reserve would be basically parkland that's not currently there's no access to it. Like there's no parking lot, there's no development yet. So it's held within the park system, but doesn't have any.
Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, a couple comments and to this, just about that no access part. And I think that needs to be perhaps more researched about some of the process or that put in place to acquire parkland are tied to access. So I would just want to be cautious on going in and going in a direction where we would just have to figure that out. And that's an important piece where when things are acquired as park, they have to be somewhat in an area of it accessible. And I have another comment, but it's for another different point. So I'm going to let everybody talk, and then whenever I can come back.
Sure.
And just to be clear, this wouldn't be a permanent no access designation. It just gives you leeway to communicate to the public that some parkland may not be developed yet with trails and parking lots and such. If the acquisition and development budgets don't align, or just to give you a little bit of leeway there communicating with the public.
You know, I wonder, in terms of a strategic goal, looking at updating that classification system, if that's not something that we should put in as a sub-bullet under the acquisition process, because they seem very, very linked. And strategically, I'm not like, I don't even update the regional park classification system. Is that a strategic move of ours? Is that something that our engagement identified? Or is this just something, is this something that we need to do? And so therefore it maybe should be embedded under the work plan of the acquisition process. And maybe the frame of reference that I'm bringing to this is I always think of strategic work as identifying the pieces that we're not doing right now and that we want to do. And so, you know, updating a classification system, is that really strategic? The acquisition process, absolutely, because that's going to hopefully increase our holdings. I see the biodiversity strategy. The continue to use 1.4 and 1.5, continue to use don't strike me as very strategic objectives. But that just might be a language thing. So yeah, I'm curious for the rest of my colleagues' thoughts on this. I'm thinking if I'm Joe Blow in the public, I'm not really sure how 1.3 I'm not sure, am I going to have to go back and read a report to understand what 1.3 and 1.4 are telling me? Yeah.
Sorry, I had to bounce away. Did you get Director Hammond's your question answered on the classification systems?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
what
Okay.
what I heard there is that we have some parks that are not completely accessible, and so we want to update and add a classification of reserve. That seems
Right.
like something that we could just do. You know, do we need to be strategic about it?
Yeah, I think it's great questions and something that we asked internally. And the word, sometimes when you ask these questions, is it broken? Or do you want to continue with something as is? And that's when the words continue sort of are saying, hey, it's actually working. You don't have to do a full rewrite on it. There needs to be an amendment, as Megan's noting about the reserve on that in that context. And then, because that was a question we asked ourselves, you know, is the classification working? Yes, it is. It's missing one piece. It's actually relatively a quick fix, a low-lying fruit. So on that front, and then the zoning aspects as well, that sort of, again, it's not broken, but it needs more defining as well too. Like on the ground, you know, we're having some of our parks sort of like, where is that zone? And some got created by a conservation covenant being put in place, like Moorcroft. It was pretty straightforward. There it is. Or the Nanaimo River, you know, where the habitats and channels are taking place. People don't even go there. Englishman River, there's zones as well. But it's not fluent throughout our system because that parks were in play before the 205 plan and management plans are in play as well. So great questions. And, you know, like if it's been done, it's done. We can pull it out and refine, but we'll still need that action to sort of say, hey, we want to add this, and I'll look at the parts and trail classifications, add a reserve period, and then you're done.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
That would be clearer for me from a reader's standpoint, I think. Yeah,
because you got to bump into that continue to all the way through as Megan works through it, because we're keep saying, is it good? Is it good? Is it broken? Is it broken? Is it, or is it, oh wait, this is a full reset on this one. We got to recreate, or it doesn't exist, so let's develop. So it's good flight points when you see the continue. Good conversation. Thanks.
I just had a question about park zoning, not the zoning system, but like actual bylaw zoning. Is that something that should be on this strategic plan? Is that something that would be helpful to have in a park system?
Do you want me to tackle that, Megan? And I can.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it certainly is. And it's one of those areas that just is not coming to the top for staff to deal with. And it does span, and it is a fairly big ask because it expands two departments, the parks as well as into planning, because you're moving into reclassification of parks. And Director Craig is familiar of the process and the time and energy and sometimes communities' expectations of what that park is may be different as well too through the Islands Trust process. So personally, I do believe it's another layer of protection that you could be adding into your parks if you want that protection. Once you designate a park, it's basically starts freezing it. When you start putting into bios, it starts freezing it more, which I think is the intent. Certainly on a regional level, community parks, you might want it to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not cautious, but just be drilled in to make sure you don't freeze it too much, because you may want to deal with some of these little parcels and move them on in another way, right? So, but it is something. It is a good undertaking to take. And Megan, on your view from a provincial level that you're seeing as well, what the standard is.
Yeah, many communities don't have a separate parks zone, but do just designate parks. So, but there's a wide range. Like there are communities across the whole spectrum, and it really is a community-specific approach. The park designation does protect parkland, so I think you captured it accurately, Tom. It's like an extra layer that you can put on there, but is that the highest priority given the level of protection you have now for your parks?
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is what's the cost benefit here? Like, obviously it would be a big project. I can see that having two departments working on it would be costly and time consuming, considering all the other things we're doing. So that's what I was wondering, should it be on this strategic plan or not?
Great questions, and make sure you bug me in about a year that, hey, Tom and Yan, have you designated these new parks come on board in the last little while? So it's on my housekeeping list to pick up on some of the land donations of late to bring forward a park designation bylaw for the additional properties brought on board, or ones that may be coming on board to make sure that's done. But again, the undersurface uses still remain, i.e. is it forestry, is it resource, is it, could be even residential. That still is underneath, but the designation is key.
Yeah,
thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, just with that, like a general comment on just sort of the strategic language, and then some specifics. Following up on Aaron's comments, I think this has been a critique leveled at their strategic plans, but just sort of like the goal and then the action, it may be wording it as outcomes, and then that allows to bundle a little bit sort of like what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve by updating the regional park classification system, or the outcomes of continuing to use the parks level site zoning system with whatever updates, like just worded as an outcome, and then all those actions can, fall under being what the actual outcome is. And just in terms of languaging, I think sort of the updating the regional park classification system is critical. I think getting that reserve designation is like an action that I would love to get done as a priority, because it's always the same response is like, well, we buy this park land, but what about the management and maintenance and of the site? And we really do need that thing to be able to say, like, this is reserved now, and that classification gets a certain amount of attention and resources put at it, and it allows us to hold on to this place where it makes sense for later development. One question that I had was just around sort of continue to communicate and collaborate with First Nations and this whole idea of partnerships. I don't know exactly what the strategic direction would be on, but I think about sort of the drinking water and watershed protection plan, and how they have an advisory committee that's sort of interjurisdictional of folks that are part of water governance. And when I look at, say, for example, like Nanaimo River park acquisition, and my motion earlier kind of alluded to try to tackle this question, but there's many different people that could be part of the puzzle of getting a hold of funding for it, and the type of ways going forward to protect that land that may not necessarily be solely in regional district jurisdiction, but could be solutions, Indigenous protected conservation areas, provincial financing, and an aspect being potentially, some form of provincial park in collaboration with a whole slew of ideas, all centered around getting parkland in our regional district, but not necessarily solely on regional district resourcing. And how can we be a convener of that sort of collaboration and facilitate it, because it's within our jurisdiction and it's a benefit to our region, but that we can leverage and facilitate the many different parts that often sometimes there's an issue in terms of like coming together. And there's, like, for example, the Nanaimo River round table, and this group gets together and talks all things Nanaimo River, and but there's no sort of like focused sort of project around that. And so I don't know if we can phrase an outcome of that way around partnership and collaboration, and maybe look at more formal, sort of like more localized collaborative bodies that could help us. And I know there's a context of how much staff resources we currently have at the moment to do that, but I think the same goes to areas in the Oceanside area as well, and it could really enhance our ability to move forward. The other point I wanted to make is just on the biodiversity strategy. I think this is excellent, and I can really see how the creation of this strategy may be where the sort of interjurisdictional collaboration can take place to develop this this lens by which we're making land use decisions and choices around protection. And I'm just curious, like biodiversity is an excellent determinant for many things. Just with that lens of natural assets where we're taking into account also sort of watershed health and management and sort of other natural asset considerations, can that strategy be broadened, or is there already an established formalized process specifically for biodiversity? Is there a way that we can sort of do that analysis of a natural asset strategy across a regional district where parks integrates to be able to like protect these areas, but have that together, because it does cross sort of like our engineering approaches or our approaches in watershed protection and that. And I think what's happening is that there's the traditional understanding of parks and conservation areas, and like there's sort of a larger integrative vision that's coming out of like the importance of having these areas protected on a multiple of different metrics, but there's no real container to like be able to put it. And these strategies can provide a bit of a collaboration force, but my depth of knowledge on how to accomplish this is not there to be able to suggest specifics. But is there a way that we can support a bit more interdepartmental collaboration and planning around these things that the Drinking Water Watershed Protection Group is focusing on and meeting those objectives, the Climate Action Technical Advisory Committee is working on, and integrate that with our parks decision making? And so, sorry for the long-winded thing, but I'm still trying to conceptualize that.
So,
Go ahead.
through to the chair. Megan might have to chime in on a little bit of that, but I think it's important for the community to know sort of how does the dinner table get set for future acquisitions, and being in a public meeting, I won't be going into the details, but I can speak to the past. And it was almost like one of those continue to as well, because I think it's important for the committee to know that that dialogue takes place on a weekly basis right now, and has been that way for years as well too. So that is how you ended up with a Coast Marsh jointly shared with Nature Trust of BC on Gabriel Island, Little Qualcomm River Estuary, jointly purchased with Ducks Unlimited, Amesman River Regional Park by a consortium, including provincial and regional funds, and then managed as a regional park by the regional district. And so even looking on future acquisitions, those conversations are taking place right now. And do take place because, as Mr. Gagnon mentioned earlier, there isn't not of money in the pot to just go by it as at a regional level. It does require funding sources, and that's how that's come forward. So, so as far as resourcing goes, that's what we do. It's got to be recognized that there is a process in play for that to happen. And it does take time as well too for that to occur. So I think it's important to know, because there's very few lands that we've owned and purchased on our own at a regional level. Almost all of them are jointly funded, or we provided funding or managing on behalf of consortium, or vice versa. So I think it's really important for that to work. The biodiversity strategy is kind of a key item, and it's something I feel is worth exploring more as we deal with the watersheds and so forth. Certainly and that's always been a challenge with this regional district as well too, is the watershed, and our water sources are typically collected or not on public land. And how can the two play together on that? So I think it's a good point there. So I throw that out there. I see Jan has something to say. I don't know if Megan wants to pull in on the biodiversity aspect of it, because it is sort of coming from recommendations from the consultant firm as well. Jan.
Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, so through the chair, and then this is just more of a comment, and then not necessarily my take on these actions, but more of a language thing, and English being my second one. Draft biodiversity strategy is a little bit of soft here. I think that developed, or something that an action verb, like we draft a lot of stuff here, and some things go through and some doesn't. So I think that I guess my suggestion is that if the vision is to have or to implement the biodiversity strategy, then perhaps the action should be to develop one.
Yep, definitely. Thanks for that. In terms of a biodiversity strategy and whether it can be expanded, yes, for sure. I think natural asset natural asset strategy is a great overlap, and there's a lot of linkages, river corridors, wetlands, shorelines, like aquifers, like these are all areas that will come up in the biodiversity strategy as well. The question as you're developing an RFP, if you're going to go externally for someone to develop this, is like, how big do you want it? How big do you want the project? Do you want to do it in pieces and build and layer, or do you want to have someone who's looking at all those pieces together? So that's just something to consider when you're actually going for that. But it could be a biodiversity and natural asset strategy. That could be a tweak to the language as well.
What do you think about that, Ben? And then Vanessa.
Yeah, so on that specifically, I think that if the biodiversity strategy is it's a specific process that sort of there's a methodology already in place in it. I think it'd be good to keep it as separate. If it's something that we're creating the methodology to implement, expanding it would be good. Or I would suggest is just have both, like have implement a biodiversity strategy, implement a natural asset strategy. And I think the natural asset strategy, something that, I know that we've been pushing in other directions as well, and it may not just solely reside in the parks. It may not solely reside in just solely being the parks department's responsibility. So maybe there could be language in there. There's a separate thing, create a biodiversity strategy, and then 1.6 or something could be developed across departmentally or be. I don't know how you would say that for a natural asset strategy that parks would partake in. I don't know how that would be set up. But and then just the other thing to respond about, I think that I can really see how the interjurisdictional wizardry that our park staff do, for all park acquisitions is happening, and that lens is there. And my question is just how can we can draw awareness to this is what actually our staff has to do, and like the complexity of these negotiations, and how can we make sure that we're resourcing that capacity to do that in the right way? Because I think that's kind of what I'm getting at as an outcome, is that there is a lot of things that have to go on to like get a park to happen, and it's not an easy task, and there requires a lot of hands and a lot of input coming together and making sure that we're able to do that without destroying our staff.
Thanks for that, Ben. And Jan and I have quipped of late, do we need a property real estate arm almost of late? So that helps put it in context.
Vanessa, you had something.
For the asset management thing, I'm not sure if it fits in with this goal, just because I'm not sure how it would directly go towards protecting the assets. I mean, it helps you identify the benefits of it and rationalize it, and actually maybe even use it to justify or support acquisition, but I don't know if it actually directly addresses this particular goal. But my goal, and this is going back to Ben's comment about measurables, when you say that we have 3% of the RDN is protected, is that in regional parks? Is that in all areas, including nature trust and municipal parks? I mean, how is that measured? And if it is, should we be setting a goal for some X% protected? And so that would be a measurable, and kind of like, I see Ben's thumbs up, yay. So, I mean, and it could be aggressive, and it could be something, we've got an aggressive solid waste target, and we're really working towards that. And that can really focus your efforts. If you're saying we want to hit this percentage target across the region, and that would also go into your biodiversity strategy as well, is like, where are you having success in protecting areas? Where do you have gaps? And might help drive some of these actions if you know that you want to reach a certain percentage protected area within a certain amount of time. And it could even be a couple of steps because, like a shorter term goal and then a longer term goal, and then just have the kind of incremental steps. I wonder if that might be helpful.
Yes, I think that's a great suggestion. It's hard to come up with a specific number at this point, but it ties in with one of the goal 6 recommendations about tying. Once you have the acquisition process updated, once you have this biodiversity strategy, and you've looked at all these things, you might be able to pick that number or to set that goal. And then you have to also link that to a financial plan to actually, that will drive a financial plan to actually achieve that, or the partnership development aspects.
My understanding of the acquisition process, but I could be totally wrong, is how do you prioritize the parcels that you've already identified and go about addressing it. So the main thing is that my understanding is the biodiversity strategy would actually kind of drive an acquisition strategy where you're looking at all of the potential things with the goals that you might want to purchase over time. And then it would feed into that process where you could rank things and then it would take care of, would kind of filter through that way. But right now, from what I've seen of our current acquisition process, we've identified specific areas that we're interested in through board motion or just various things, but haven't had to taken a real holistic look at the entire region and what we're trying to accomplish, mostly because it would be probably disheartening how much we need to do. But I think that, yeah, being able to set that target, I think might be helpful, although tricky. I agree.
10%.
Yeah.
Oh, minimum 12. 12 is the minimum standard. I think it might have actually been increased by now, hasn't it?
Let's go for 15 and just call it good.
Go ahead, Betsy.
That's great. So Megan, on the national level, I know I've gone to a few sessions on this one as well. Then there is sort of targets being put out for at a national, international level. Can you kind of give a realm of what those targets are right now?
I don't have those off the top of my head. It's so specific to the jurisdiction too. Like for example, the RDN is in a different context to other regional districts that have a substantial amount of crown land and don't. So there's a very different context.
Got it. Yeah. There's great documentation out there on this conversation, though, and then it'd be good. Maybe if we can find links to pass on to this committee, it might be helpful. Just to
sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Some benchmarks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to have some numbers and benchmarks around percent of protected area. I think that it would actually be a very important political tool and something that can really focus the conversation. And I know it can be tricky to set that. And planners often, we're having this discussion about sending targets in the city and Nanaimo around environmental and social goals. The executability of it. But I think having an aspirational target would be very beneficial and ground that in, obviously some scientific understanding around ecological functioning. And of course, it's very site specific, but it's sort of this concept of fractals of percent protected area just for, it's like at a national level, I think, it used to be 12% or something like that, but you could, protect all this high elevation, scrub brush that's got zero value. And then that leaves everything open to development. And I think having that fractal perspective is like at every scale, there should be a certain amount that's protected and developed in terms of how biodiversity works and groundwater penetration and all that. And I think we do need to apply that here. And then that allows us something to go forward to, because we are in a situation where with the ENN land grant, there is a limited amount that we actually can protect in a certain way, you know, because there's not that crown land. So I think it's even more important to have that goal. So if that type of languaging could be put into this plan, I think that it could serve us well, and also acknowledging the trickiness of that, but the discussion would be worthwhile. Thank you.
Yeah, we can certainly provide some, I have some numbers, I just don't have them at my fingertips, but some benchmarking, and then also, you know, looking at average land values and doing some quick math will give you a big, like a ballpark idea of what those different percentages might mean.
Awesome.
It's okay, we can move forward. I know we have a lot to get through still.
Yeah,
But great discussion. I really appreciate all the feedback so far. I'm just going to touch on this last recommendation for this under this goal. Like I said, there is engagement with First Nations is underway, and just recognizing that the RDN is within traditional and unceded territories of several First Nations within the Coast Salish peoples. Park departments across BC and across the nation are looking at opportunities to explore topics with First Nations, like how do we better protect important cultural areas and sacred sites? How do we support traditional uses? Is there enhanced visibility of Indigenous language, arts, and culture in the parks and trails system, and what might that look like? Even, you know, incorporating traditional knowledge in management of regional parks potentially. So there's all obviously other topics not listed here, you know, not mentioned, but that might come up through that engagement work. So not to be presumptuous of what those values are, but opportunities for ecotourism and how the parks play into that sector as well. It's an important thing to consider. This second goal is all about the health and well-being, but really recognizing these two aspects: the trails system and outdoor programs and recreation in parks. So the trail system, in the engagement, people love the trails and they want to walk. They want looping trails through natural areas. that was the number one thing. That's a great way, like a really low barrier, low cost way for people to stay healthy, to exercise in their communities. And this first action is around a multi-use trails system, and really at the regional level. So this speaks to, you know, working with MOTI, member municipalities, landowners, and other stakeholders to get a vision similar to the biodiversity approach. You need a vision for this regional trails network that everyone can get behind. And then as you chip away at it, different jurisdictions do different pieces, you collaborate, you find funding sources for different pieces as you go forward. But it really does require a coordinated approach, especially within the complex context of the RDN. Some of the examples of things that might need to happen to do this is just mapping a vision for where these trails are. Are you going to have one that's connecting north to south along, you know, the ocean front, or with water access points along it? Do you have an inland route north to south? You know, do you have the routes going from the shoreline up to the mountains and that valley to peak idea up some of the river valleys? How do you connect to Port Alberni? How do you connect to the Cowichan Valley to like expand the network even more? And then also, how does that trail system potentially overlap with the biodiversity strategy? You can see like the river valleys are obviously going to be part of that biodiversity strategy and are key corridors for movement of wildlife as well. And how does that layer on with people on top of that? And can you find multiple benefits from these two different approaches? So that's how that first recommendation is getting at. The second one is more around the community trails. So at the electoral area level, there was the past plan, parks plan really focused more on park to park connections. But what I've seen through active transportation plans, trail planning initiatives, best practices, it's more about taking, where people are living, connecting them to parks, connecting them to schools, connecting them to their daily shopping, those daily trips, as well as some of the opportunities to do looping trails for health and just recreation, and then providing some trail opportunities that are just for the experience of the trail itself. So I'm suggesting through this a shift from the park to park, limited it from the park to park approach to that more active transportation approach, and recognizing how important those community trails are to people's daily trips and health. And these two, the regional system and the community trails system, can intertwine, but they would be quite different in terms of the scale of and the design of the trails, for example, at those different levels, based on how much use and what type of use is expected.
So, let's Chair.
Go ahead, Tom, and then.
Sure, and this is a unique one, and it's a constant theme that we heard during the open houses, and that is how the residents of our regional district want to get from A to B, and it may not be in park, as you're seeing here. And so there's been internal staff conversations in regards to, well, how do we handle all the asks within our park system, and then also take on additional connection points that may not be park related, and frankly dealing with MOTI infrastructure. Director Craig's more than familiar with the energy it takes to get from A to B in a fairly relatively easier area and going forward. So when we speak to resourcing later, and it may not be park resourcing as well too, it may be through, if you're in a municipality, this is where utilities and engineering picks up, and parks stay on parks, and because they're road builders and pipe layers and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's something that has to have a very honest look at if this is an aspiration, and you're hearing it from the community, and it's been very constant from various boards over the years, so it's not new, then how do we address it? And I don't have the answer yet, so I'm hoping for this to be the jumping off point to get to that, to meet the needs of the residents that we're hearing. But it does mean if you're not resourcing this area right, you will be pulling from the parks system, and stuff won't happen over there. And they may not be the right people to be doing this as well. No disrespect to my own staff, but there is people that build roads for a living and lay pipe for a living, and we do that. So I got a school group going by me. Great to hear kids, by the way. So I'll have to chime off here, but anyway, just put that out there on the resourcing aspect.
Thanks, Tom. Go ahead, Ben.
Just a point of clarification here, and then I got some questions. Just in terms of, by making parks and trails a key contributor to health, and like having that as a goal, like is this sort of is it just with the aspect of trails? Are you saying, Tom, like we need to like have almost like a separate trails focus? And resource that with the skill sets necessary to be able to execute on having that?
Yeah, through to the chair. We do a really good job within our parks, given the opportunity to do the good job in the parks with the resources. And so take a community park, or ideally a regional parks, it's done well because that's where it goes. Where we're learning and stumbling at times is in the road corridors.
Right.
And so the hard infrastructure, the hard shoulders, we're really good at doing documentation. We've got a good license of occupation with MOTI, not been able to pull that one out of the hat. But the expertise to do civil works needs to be accommodated in some form. So it's either recognizing it through the parks, or maybe and we've talked about it corporately as well, is it through the utilities and engineering side of the game, because there is engineers and people that do that, not necessarily maybe roadworks right now. But I think there has to be a recognition that in this plan, that if you have this higher aspiration, the adequate people and the right people have to be in play to do that. As far as trails, Director Gesselbach, I think we're good there if that's what we're going to do.
Right.
But it's really hard to be doing both right now. So you're kind of getting the cracks in the armor showing. You're kind of seeing it maybe with some delegations, like saying, well, yeah, you said you're supposed to do something in 208. How come we haven't done yet? Because, well, we're actually been working on active transportation type projects and would love to, I think the staff would actually love to be back in the woods, frankly,
Right.
at least from the park side. Yeah.
Great, I can really understand, and I think we are in a situation where we're bumping up against the edges where a certain type of integration and expansion needs to happen. Where at the city we have in our engineering department an active transportation group that specializes in those type of building those type of corridors, and it's not something that we have at the regional district expertise, and something if we want to go that direction, we are going to have to resource it accordingly. Just in terms of goals and sort of tying in transportation on trails, as well as riparian areas and access. Is this the goal on access? Hold on, I might be getting ahead of myself here. No,
no.
This is not improve. This is not. Oh yeah, improve equity. That's the next one. Sorry, I have comments for that one.
Okay, I think Jan wanted to jump in at some point there.
Yeah, so through the chair. So again, this is not me weighing on anything here, more of a wording. Again, suggestion here. So if the regional district wants to make parks and trails a key contributor, perhaps the word support's not required there. Just because supporting making, which might as well just go make or any sort of action verb. And then my other comment is on the second one, and continue to prioritize improvement. I think that if we would put the word prioritize, it implies over something. So some reference to what would come second would be probably my suggestion. Thank you.
If I could just jump in, Stuart,
Of course, yeah.
I had a similar response to the languaging, and yeah, would just really like to see stronger, more emphatic statements. So taking out support, continue to, I understand that belays a history and continuing on good work, but if we're prioritizing improvements to trail networks, let's just say that. And also if we're prioritizing improvements to trail networks in community parks versus regional parks, I also think the clearer we can get on that, the better it's going to be. Yeah.
Good point. I hear about trails all the time. That's what my community wants, is more trails. But is that going to be a regional focus? Like, I don't know. So that's a very good point here. Go ahead, Vanessa.
I was just going to pick up on what Tom was saying, and you know, the Village Way path that we're creating now it's within the Parks Department, but it's, I think a lot of times because of the weird way that regional districts go about doing their service areas, it seems simpler sometimes just to put things into an existing service area than having to create an entirely new service area. And I think this incremental kind of adding on to what is considered parks, and certainly we do it in Area B, and we're now talking about putting some kind of boat launchy thing, and you know, there's active transportation aspects. And I was talking to Salt Spring, the director for Salt Spring Island, because they have active transportation, and they actually created a new service area, and then it turns out the park staff is doing it, but it does allow it allows the separation, at least in terms of funding and clarity. And so, yeah, that might be something that would be worthwhile considering. And then, and ensuring, and this goes to making sure the right people are tasked with it. And it may, in some cases, require overlap with parks, but, you know, what is the definition of a park? It comes down to, and does the Village Way path, which is a strip of asphalt in the right of way along our main corridor, it's in parks, but is that a park? it is being treated as a park on Gabriola. So maybe having those types of conversations would be very worthwhile, and maybe even address some of the issues that we're finding with staff capacity, where we're just, we're just adding stuff to what's considered a park portfolio instead of going back and saying, times have changed. There's a big demand now for active transportation and different types of services that there weren't before. And maybe we need to create a new service area.
Yeah, that's a great point, Vanessa. Maybe we do need to explore active transportation service. So, food for thought. Any other points on this? Oh, Megan, we can't hear you for some reason, or I can't at least.
Yeah, I can't either.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Megan, you're muted.
Yeah. Do you want to
Not
pop
muted,
out,
no.
Megan? And, do you want to pop out and pop back in?
Well,
Still can't hear. I don't know if it's up. I don't know. Ivy, can you hear us? Are you able to connect with Megan? Oh, we're losing you too. So Ivy and Megan, we couldn't hear you either, Ivy, when you spoke.
Sorry.
So
Okay,
You're back.
I unplugged and plugged back in.
we can hear you now.
So who knows? I guess the question back is, we're at the draft plan stage, so you have a little bit of time to think about this and to see what the right language is. It is a big undertaking to take on active transportation and to add that to the parks system. It's definitely, there was a, I'm not sure what the current staff that you have hired, but there was a someone who was just overseeing all the trails data and management of that. But I believe she retired, so I don't know where that lies now. So there's definitely needs to be like some dedicated time, and it's.
Yeah, I think we're fine on the coordination, Megan. It's to getting it into the ground and literally the civil works. That's where we're starting conceptually, coming up at a high level, great, but getting into the ground. So for example, it's Mark Dobbs and Yan that are putting this stuff into the ground, in addition to overseeing 7 community parks and so forth in the regional system. So the days are long, and so conceptually figuring out A to B and all that sort of stuff, I'm not as worried about. I'm more worried about what does it take to be overseeing multi-million-dollar civil works. That's where the crutch is right now.
Yeah, and I know that's come up with substantial bridge projects as well, and I can just skip actually down to this staff recommendation of creating a superintendent of parks planning, research, and development. I think that's where Jan and you are going with, in terms of creating a position that can handle more of those big projects. But maybe you can speak to that.
Actually, it doesn't. So this way is good to talk about. So this is the 6.1 is the one that's more on the planning and research and development. So that's to handle the planning aspect, and that's being done right now. Then natural resource areas coordinator, that's a commitment made by the board, tied on that side. But that's why I'm putting this on the table right now, because it's sort of it's been quiet and silent, and we haven't talked about it at a very high strategic level with the board. So this is a great opportunity for this committee to hear the issues, to then sort of draw this stuff forward. Because and that's why I'm putting it out there. If there is that goal, and it is a good goal, don't get me wrong, I think it's awesome, and resident of the area, I want to get from A to B too. But I'm just saying we got to have the right resources and staff in play for that, and none of our approaches today account for that. We're just sort of picking it up where we can and bumping projects along or delaying stuff to meet the emerging goals or the aspirations right now.
Thanks, Tom. I had Jan and then Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I guess it was just more of a more information or clarification about the active transportation in parks. I guess it was just to say that there's it's a lot more complex than it sounds going to the Ministry of Transportation land, really, and it's really not the same as developing a trail in a park that that is titled to the RDN and managed. So I guess I just wanted to share that so people know that it really is a total different approach, and it's a total different workload and approval process and delays and so on. And you know, we totally live it now, but I just wanted to make sure that, you know, if the decision or a goal is that that is at the forefront of the strategy, that's looked at, you know, in depth about what it implies to be in the business of the Ministry of Transportation.
Thanks, Jan. Go ahead, Ben.
I think it would be helpful in the languaging around that, which I think all this discussion is at the moment captured underneath continue to prioritize improvements to trail networks, is to maybe state specifically something around, you know, committing to active transportation, and then having that linked up with what that means in terms of resourcing specifically for, you know, specific positions. Am I capturing that? That's sort of the intent of what needs to happen. It's like if the board decides we want to, you know, focus on active transportation routes within our park system, then we need to have the right skill sets and resourcing to be able to do that efficiently.
Yep, exactly.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
This echoes some of the other comments about the language is continue to prioritize improvements to the trails network. You know, that's not a measurable, actionable goal really, or action. It's you know, if we want to, you know, allocate X amount of dollars, or, you know, looking at number 6 that you had up briefly, you talk about, I can't even remember what it is now, but, you know, if you're identifying a goal for percentage, there it is, continue to support a parkland acquisition fund. So yes, but, you know, if we're developing a strategic plan and we're going to set a goal maybe for a percentage, you know, what is that going to cost? So, you know, do we need to start adding a dollar amount or a percentage amount, or, you know, something that really gives you a goal to work towards, and a measurable. So have we accomplished this? And this would be a recommendation going to the board, which may or may not support this idea. But, you know, if you want to create X amount of kilometers of new trail within 5 years, or, you know, very specific things, because continue to support, we are supporting it. We put money towards the budget, the staff, you know, whether or not they have capacity to do things to the extent that they'd like to is not clear. But yeah, I think it would be useful to have very active and specific measurables. Thanks.
Thanks, Vanessa. Well, we haven't quite made it through 2 of 6, and we're running low on time. So I don't know what you guys think. Do we want to get through what we can and then have another meeting, or what do you think?
I'm happy with that. I unfortunately can't stay past 3 o'clock today. You know, I think the conversation that we're having is we're kind of repeating the same things, and I'm wondering, I'm guessing Megan is kind of capturing the sense of what we're after, and even if we don't get to the later draft goals, having a shift in the language, I think that we're pretty intent on would be good for all of them. Maybe we can motor through.
Sure. Okay. Well, with that in mind, back to you, Megan.
Sure. I might just skip to ones that I want to highlight for you. Just to mention, 2.3 is just about building on the good work that and collaboration that's been going on with the Recreation Department, and then also potential for other departments, like the Watersheds Department that does a lot of citizen science and things, and there's potential in the parks system to increase that. In terms of equity and access, these really talk about more about the community parks system than the regional park system. And we can get into, you know, it's looking at setting walking distance standards and setting park development standards based on the classifications to basically to be clear with the public and manage expectations around park development. Number 3 is to, because there is an aging population and just a desire and just a recognition of the importance of being inclusive and expanding access for more people, finding places in the regional and community parks system where you can do an all ages, all abilities, wheelchair accessible, where you can put those facilities, find those, prioritize them, and implement some of those. You're not going to be able to do it everywhere, but to try to do, you can do accessibility audits to find the low-hanging fruit, simple improvements that will improve accessibility, and then also make some longer-term goals. And we have talked a lot about the regional districts.
Sorry, Megan.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Jump in real quick.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This was just a comment here on the goal itself. Wording, just I think I'm just a bit in between access and equity. I think there's perhaps a bit of redundancy here. Maybe it's improve, you know, like improve accessibility by providing equal access or something. Just a comment here. Not sure what the real difference would be here between equity and access.
The equity piece in this context really speaks to where the parks are located within the system, and then the access and accessibility piece is how people can actually get into, how people use the park or trail itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Goal 4, engage residents, support partners, and volunteers. And we've touched on a lot of opportunities for collaboration at the regional level. Things like climate change have to be tackled with the big picture in mind and with everybody at the table. Regional trails or the bigger trails network as well, biodiversity strategy. These are all big problems, big questions, and they need everybody at the table. So those have been highlighted in various places. There have been community-driven projects brought to the regional board, and just to solidify a process for evaluating those that supports the community for those projects, but also considers that equity lens. Supporting recreation on private forestry lands. This is specifically around mountain bike trails and the mountain bike trail development that's happened on private forestry land, and the question of whether the regional district, how the regional district participates in that process. And our recommendation is that the RDN does support those initiatives and participates in partnerships to enable that and to make sure that those recreational assets are are available and protected, and you help community organizations that are bringing a lot of value to the region through these trail development projects. Engagement and programming in regional parks. I think I already spoke to that with the recreation department programs, expanding their reach into parks. You actually need washrooms, you need water, you need a place for a school bus to turn around, for example, to have more programming in parks. Those are some of the infrastructure implications of doing that. And then I think I want to skip forward as well to the climate change lens and just have a chance to go through some of these components with you. Working with other regional district departments is very important. I know that the conversations are happening, but just really to solidify that as part of the Parks Department and finding ways to collaborate, use the information from other departments to maximize the benefits of the parks for climate change resiliency. The park system is going to be under threat. The alpine areas, estuaries, floodplains, wetlands, lakes, and ocean fronts in particular are at highest risk of climate change impacts. How is the park system going to adapt to that? Is there a role for parks to play in protecting different types of areas based on their vulnerability to climate change? How are decisions going to be made around investments, restoration, and habitat enhancement and land acquisitions within the park system? That's 5.3 is really around parks management in the context of climate change. There are going to be a lot more, there's just going to be a lot more demands on the management side of the parks system, and that needs to be recognized as well. There's going to be more invasive species, plant species, insects, disease infestation, tree die-off with with drought due to drought conditions. You have to do hazard tree management. That's going to increase. These are all realities that the park management is going to go up for all the parks, regional parks, community parks, and that's something that that I just wanted to bring to attention through this recommendation. Was there somebody who wanted to jump in?
I think Jan had something maybe on the last slides. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know we were going to run through them, so I think I'm okay. I thought we were going to stop, but I'm going to. Okay.
Well, given we only have about 5 minutes, was the decision to have a follow-up meeting, or what? So I can go slower.
I think Director Hermans was hoping to get through, and then we could do there will be another meeting, and we could always sort of front end with any unfinished business or direct comments to you, Megan, through staff or however you want to facilitate that. But when we meet again, we can sort of recapitulate, and then we can go in camera to tackle some other conversations that need to take place. So.
Okay, great. This last recommendation is just to recognize there are a lot of overlaps with parkland acquisition and climate change, and that includes, maybe there's acquisition money that you can justify acquisition for lowering infrastructure costs or these natural assets and protecting those as part of this. So, like thinking creatively about how you're going to fund your acquisition. There's an opportunity here, and funding from different levels of government and through different partners. We have touched on changes to the structure or the resources within the Park Service. I didn't add anything here about the increased management that is expected over the next 20 some years, in particular around how the park system is going to need more management and investment from that side. But certainly the Parks Planning Research Development position would support the parks team as a whole. The Natural Areas Coordinator, I guess, is on the books already. I had suggested that there would be somebody specific specifically designated, or at least some specific staff time dedicated to trails and sort of a trails specialty that might improve the efficiency of delivering those projects and or active transportation. So we've touched on that as well. The Parkland Acquisition Fund, the continue to support Parkland Acquisition Fund, I know does sound a bit weak. In the full wording, it's create a Parkland Acquisition Fund that is based on acquisition goals, land value, and potential for other funding sources. So you have a Parkland Acquisition Fund, but it's not necessarily linked to the goals. There aren't clear goals in terms of what % you want to protect. What are the biodiversity goals and all of these things. So doing that work and then bringing it back to that Parkland Acquisition Fund and updating that is a piece of the puzzle.
So Megan, can I just add one thing? And it's one area that I would like to work more with this committee on the next time we go around. And it has come up in a couple of workshops of late at the board table that you may not be aware of and so forth. And then certainly conversations at a staff level. And that is the equity of the staffing resources between community and regional. And so it's just sort of making sure that one is not subsidizing the other. And if it is being subsidized, it needs to be corrected. So what I'm saying is a vast amount of staff time from a GM to a manager to planners has been spent on the community system. And it's underfunded. So we need to look at ways to correct that. And this is the table where it starts. And this is the plan where it starts as well too. So there'll be budget meetings, as each electoral area director knows, to talk about future endeavors and aspirations. And this will be part of our conversation as well too. But to have this issue be put on the table, I think it's worthwhile. We should talk about it the next time we meet, just so there's an awareness of the pressures on the system and how we've, as staff, have put band-aids on it at a cost maybe to one system over the other. So I think we just need to address that. So it's not more about positions, it's maybe how do you resource to meet the goals of both systems fairly, and to ensure if you're a municipality and you're paying for that regional system and you're not subsidizing a community system, and for if you want to be have more service in a rural area, then make sure that we have the adequate resources to do that, and it's not being pulled from another project or the staff time to make that happen. So I'd like for us to talk a little bit more about that the next time we meet, if that's okay with the committee. But it does hit this bullet in some form that it doesn't, these don't really address the matter that we need to deal with.
Part of that is in the equity and access recommendations as well. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Megan.
No problem. I just wanted to say maybe next time we could have 3 hours, because that 2 hours has gone pretty quick this time around. There's a lot to unpack, but if you want to just run through the last ones real quick, Megan, we're pretty well at 3 o'clock now. So
sure. 6.5 is in more detail in the full draft, but looking at those key partnerships, there, the nature, Nanaimo and area land trust, for example, is super keen to partner again. The watersheds committee, the department, I'm not going to get the wording right, but they're keen to collaborate. The recreation department is keen to work together, as well as member municipalities. So got really a lot of good feedback in terms of partnerships. And then maintaining an asset management system for short and long-term budget planning for parks development and renovation. This can also include natural assets and developing a system around the natural assets in the system. 6.7, establishing levels of service for each classification of community and regional park and trail, does hopefully speak to part of the equity piece that we might be coming back to in the next meeting around, what are the expectations around community parks and development of community parks. We know there are some parcels that aren't developed yet, and how does that proceed in an equitable way so that there's an equal level of service across the region. And then ensuring that operating budgets reflect the levels of those levels of service, and linking those two together is a really important step as well. I think we've run out of time. I will be coming back with engagement materials the next round, or our next meeting, I believe, is June, I want to say 20th, but could be wrong. So if we're okay to postpone that, I can take you through the engagement. But essentially, we're doing a ton of outreach. The RDN staff is going to do a ton of outreach. We're going to have virtual public open houses, which I have hosted in other communities over the past year with a fair amount of success. The online survey is going to be a key piece. And then also there's ongoing First Nations engagement that will be incorporated.
And maybe just on the latter part, Megan, I'll touch base there. So myself, Elizabeth, Hughes, and Gagnon are looking at approaches with our 3-member First Nation communities. And we'll be adapting for each one to try to engage and obtain good information, both on sort of the very high level, but also their views. And it will be multi-pronged depending on the resources within the nation as well too, because they do vary. And so it could be as meeting with a chief in one to representatives from another and so forth. So we want to ensure that that step is done before you start sort of getting into the fine details of the plan without obtaining good information on that front. So as you can appreciate, they're all individual communities that we all have to approach in separate ways to get the information that will help resource this plan going forward. So just wanted to give some updates. So we're hoping to do that in the month of June as well.
Stuart, could I just jump in? I'm going to have to go. Can I just have a sense of next steps? I'm not sure are we going to set another meeting where we go into these in more detail along with the edits that hopefully Megan and her team are going to incorporate based on discussion?
That was
just give me a sense of what our next step is.
In-camera stuff as well. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, to that, I think that I had the same point here. I think first thing, I just want to give assurance to everybody that I think that the timeline that was proposed for the engagement is it perhaps needs to be revised in light of some of the edits and some of the input that are coming in, and some of the work that needs to be done so the plan really reflects your vision. So I just wanted to say that I wouldn't, like it says June in there. June is in 11 days from now. I can't see us going out in the public with this. I just wanted to give you that assurance. And then the other thing is I'll be trying to find some time. It's budget time for us. We have a few very large capital projects on the go as well. So I will go in the calendar and try to find a good time for us to look at having another session, maybe same kind of format, but maybe without an introduction, and just stick strictly to the actual goal and pick it up at number 3. And hopefully we can make it to 6, and then the Parkland acquisition. I think it just needs to be a standalone meeting in camera where I can share with you where we're at, and it would be more of an information. It would be good for you to provide input, but it'll be mainly an information session. There'll be a lot there, a lot of new information, a lot of new format, maybe things you haven't seen. So that's my plan. Maybe another 2 meetings, if that's okay with everybody.
Sure. And can I just make a request? When we're going to discuss something, can that be included in our agenda materials? I felt a little like I wasn't prepared today. I wasn't able to really offer because I'd read the presentation, but previously. So if I could just make that request, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And thank you all. I'm going to have to sign off now.
Okay. See you, Erin. Well, we're 3:06, so I guess we should probably call it for today, and look forward to the next one.
And maybe I'll just put out there, if you want to have your comments put forward and caption them, send them on to Jan, and we can move them on to Megan and the team, so we can keep moving as we're rolling down the road. It's fine. We don't have to just stop and go. So it'd be great. great.
Great. So if we've got comments or want to just formalize sort of what we were saying, we can send that in and that can be taken into account.
Definitely, it would help. It just helps the team be able to try to figure it out and come up with a solution for it. That'd be great.
Great. And yeah, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody. I understand sort of the resource constraints that we're working under to be able to put this together and move it forward and all the other different things. And one thing I really hope on this strategy going forward, it clearly articulates what's needed to properly support the park's operation here and make sure that that's clear.
Yeah, exactly. It'll make our job easier to get this plan approved. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Thank you, everyone. Look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Gusbach. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, carried unanimously. Thank you.
Have a good day, guys.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.